Hello, and welcome to Mind Sherlock, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today, I bring you a brand new Sherlock Holmes mystery, filled with twists, clues, and clever deductions. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel the case together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now, let's get started. It was upon a sullen afternoon in early October that I found myself once more seated in the familiar, tobacco-scented confines of Baker Street. The rain, steady and persistent, tapped against the panes like a restless messenger, and the mist from the Thames clung to the city like a shroud. Within the room, the hearth burned low, and Sherlock Holmes lay stretched upon the settee, long limbs folded, eyes closed, his mind adrift in that peculiar state of semi-conscious rumination that I had come to know well. "You have that look, Holmes," I ventured, "which suggests you are either about to solve the problems of mankind or lament the absence of any worthy pursuit." He did not stir. "When the mind is deprived of nourishment, Watson," he murmured at last, "it feeds upon itself. I would rather dissect the thoughts of a criminal than those of my own ennui." I smiled at his characteristic gloom, but before I could offer a reply, Mrs. Hudson's brisk knock was followed by the soft sound of footsteps in the corridor. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes," came her voice. "Most urgent," he says. Holmes sat up at once. "Show him in." The door opened to reveal a tall, distinguished figure, though the elegance of his attire could not mask the pallor of his face nor the tremor in his gloved hands. He removed his hat with deliberation and stepped forward. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I beg your pardon for intruding unannounced, but I am in some distress." Holmes gestured to the armchair opposite him. "Pray sit, sir, and let us hear what matter has brought you through the rain at this hour." The man seated himself and drew a silver case from his breast pocket. His voice, though cultured, bore the strain of recent unrest. "My name is Sir Reginald Farington. You may know it from the political pages, formerly Chancellor of the Exchequer. But I come not as a man of office, Mr. Holmes, but as one deeply troubled by events of an altogether personal nature." Holmes inclined his head, eyes gleaming with interest. "Go on, Sir Reginald. The floor is yours." "There is, beneath the ancestral house in Sussex, where my family has resided for generations, a vault. It is not a crypt, nor a place for the dead, but rather a chamber sealed and entrusted to our line since the time of my grandfather. Within it lie old family ledgers, political correspondence of a delicate nature, and, most critically, records from my early career. Records which, should they be made public, could alter more than one man's reputation." He paused to steady himself. Holmes sat forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Recently," Sir Reginald continued, "a most troubling incident occurred. A week past, my groundskeeper, a loyal man named Griggs, was found lying unconscious beside the gate to the vault. There were no signs of forced entry. The iron lock remained intact. And yet, when we examined the interior, we found that a compartment, one accessible only from within, had been tampered with. A lockbox within it had been opened." Watson frowned. "And Griggs? Has he recovered?" "He remains insensible. The local physician believes it may have been a seizure or stroke brought on by fright. I am less convinced." Holmes's expression darkened. "And was anything taken?" "I could not say for certain. The lockbox once held sensitive papers, yes, chiefly those concerning a scandal during a colonial operation in India some 30 years ago, a matter that was quietly resolved at the time. However, I have kept no precise inventory. And the key? Holmes asked. There is only one key to the vault, Sir Reginald said gravely. It has been in my study for decades, and yet, when I went to retrieve it, it was gone. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. Anything else? Sir Reginald reached into his coat and withdrew a folded slip of paper. This arrived by post 2 days after the incident. Holmes opened the note. The paper was rough, the writing bold and uneven. The silence of the dead can be broken, and the Chancellor's truth will bleed. A long silence followed. Holmes rose and turned to the fire, tossing the note into the flames. He watched it curl into ash. This vault, he said, is below ground? Yes, it is built into the stone foundation of the house, accessible only through a heavy iron gate. And no servants have access. Only myself. My daughter Eliza lives with me, but she has no knowledge of its contents. And my estate manager, Mr. Holloway, is an old and trusted man. Holmes returned to his chair. Sir Reginald, I believe we are dealing not only with intrusion, but with motive, knowledge, and means of a very specific and very dangerous kind. We must go to Sussex at once. Watson, pack your bag. We leave within the hour. Sir Reginald stood, relief flickering across his troubled features. You have my gratitude, Mr. Holmes. I trust your discretion. You may trust it, Holmes replied, his eyes narrowing with thought. But whether the truth chooses to remain discreet, that I cannot promise. We arrived at Farington House 2 days hence, having departed London by the early train and journeyed through a countryside steadily consumed by autumnal mist. The journey was conducted in silence for the most part. Holmes leaning into the corner of the compartment with that inward gaze of his, only occasionally tapping his long fingers upon the glass. As we stepped from the carriage onto the gravel drive, I was struck by the sombre aspect of the house. It was a grand yet weather-worn estate, crouched low beneath ivy and age, with gables like watchful brows and windows that blinked solemnly beneath the overcast sky. The air about it carried that peculiar stillness I had come to associate with secrets long undisturbed. Holmes's gaze swept the facade and the ground beneath our feet with minute intensity. Observe, Watson, he murmured, pointing toward the south wall. That iron drainage pipe, newly repaired yet oddly discoloured at the base. Note it. We were met at the door by a butler, whose manner was efficient, but whose eyes betrayed apprehension. He led us to a drawing-room hung with ancestral portraits, whose painted stairs followed one's movement with unnerving fidelity. There, Sir Reginald awaited us, his composure somewhat restored, though the deep lines about his mouth betrayed sleepless nights. The vault lies beneath the west wing, he informed us. You shall be given full access. I have asked the household to cooperate in all ways. Holmes bowed slightly. My thanks. If the house itself is to be interrogated, then it must have no secrets withheld from us. I could not suppress a shiver at his words. The place, with its creaking floorboards and long shadows, already struck me as a dwelling ill at ease with its own history. The silence within its walls was the kind one might find not in solitude, but in long-forgotten guilt. And so, the game, if I may use the phrase Holmes himself was fond of, had well and truly begun. It was that afternoon that we were introduced to the principal figures of the household, beyond Sir Reginald himself. First among them was Miss Eliza Farington, his daughter, A woman of perhaps 26, with keen grey eyes and a bearing that mixed candour with a certain steeliness. She greeted us with polite reserve, but wasted little time on pleasantries. "If you are here to discover what lies at the heart of this matter," she said to Holmes, "you may wish to begin not with the vault, but with what my father fears will be uncovered." Holmes studied her intently. "And what do you believe that to be, Miss Farington?" She hesitated, then replied, "That he has kept secrets from Parliament, and from me." Next came Mr. Holloway, the estate manager. He was a man of stooped posture and slow gait, owing to a pronounced limp, though his voice was firm and his tone clipped. His manner toward Eliza was correct, yet I detected a faint undertone of resentment, perhaps born of her progressive opinions or her increasing authority within the estate. "I've served this house for 30 years, he said, "and I've never seen such disturbance as these past weeks." Holmes nodded, making no reply, but I saw him glance at Holloway's shoes with particular interest. The third and final figure to offer us his counsel was the local priest, Father Dorset, a wiry man with pale skin and sunken cheeks who wore his clerical collar like a yoke. He met with us in the library, where he had come at Sir Reginald's request. "There are things," he said, in a voice scarcely above a whisper, "best left in darkness, Mr. Holmes. The Faringtons have long stood in this parish, and their vault is more than brick and iron. It contains burdens of conscience." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Conscience rarely lies dormant without cost, Father." "You may find," the priest replied, "that those who stirred the past may not live to speak of it." It was a melodramatic warning, to be sure, but I confess I felt its chill settle upon me long after the priest had taken his leave. Holmes, however, merely muttered, "The shadows grow darker, Watson. Let us see what light can reveal." That same evening, armed with a lantern and the iron key retrieved from Sir Reginald's private drawer, replaced by a temporary duplicate, as the original had mysteriously vanished, Holmes and I were led to the vault by Holloway himself. The corridor beneath the west wing descended in a narrow stone incline, the air growing colder with every step. And at its end stood a great iron gate fastened with an ornate lock that bespoke craftsmanship of a bygone age. "I shall wait at the stair," Holloway said, his voice hollow as the passage, "if you have no objection." Holmes made none. He turned the key and pushed the gate inward with a creak that echoed like a groan. We stepped inside. The chamber beyond was modest in size, its floor lined with flagstone, and along the far wall stood a great oak cabinet secured by a heavy bolt. Cobwebs trembled in the corners, and yet a subtle disturbance caught Holmes's eye almost immediately. "Watson," he said softly, "note the dust upon the flagstones. Here, see, there are 2 sets of footprints, one fresh, leading to the cabinet and back again, the other, older, barely visible." He moved about the room with the careful grace of a surgeon, pausing at the cabinet. "This lock shows no sign of forced entry, yet the bolt bears new scratches, as though tampered with from within." I glanced at the ceiling and walls. "No second entrance?" "None that I can discern. And yet something, or someone, has been here." He knelt beside a scuffed patch of stone. "And here is the most telling clue of all." He held up a scrap of fabric, silken, black, and torn at the edge. "A glove," he murmured. "Left hand, worn by someone cautious enough to cover their tracks, and yet careless in the execution." As he moved again toward the far corner, he paused. "Do you detect a faint odour, Watson? Something chemical, an acrid foreign scent?" I sniffed the air and nodded. "Like camphor, but sharper." Holmes's brow furrowed. Indeed, a rare tincture, I suspect. Possibly Eastern. Not something one would expect to find in an English cellar. He straightened and surveyed the room one last time. No visible theft, no broken lock, and yet we are left with footprints, a torn glove, and the stench of something unnatural. Curious, is it not? As we stepped back into the corridor, I could not help but feel that we had entered not merely a chamber of stone, but one of secrets waiting to awaken. Later that night, Holmes requested access to Sir Reginald's study. The old man, though weary, obliged. It was a dark panelled room lined with books, many bound in fading leather, their titles long illegible with age. Holmes moved methodically, opening drawers and volumes, inspecting hinges and handles. After some time, he extracted a worn ledger from a locked compartment and turned to the final entries. Here we are, he said quietly. An entry marked only with initials and a year, E.H. 1892, and beneath it, retained in confidence, India, Surat, Northern Territory, 23 lost. He closed the ledger with care. Does that date strike you, Watson? I frowned. It would coincide with the close of the Imperial campaign in that region, would it not? Indeed. And Surat was the site of a disputed skirmish that never reached the papers, at least not the British ones. We questioned Sir Reginald once more, though his answers were strained and evasive. It was long ago, he said at last. Unpleasant business, but necessary. I did what was asked of me. Holmes regarded him in silence, then replied, and others paid the price. That night, back in our guest quarters, Holmes spread the torn glove on the table beside the ledger. There is a name within these pages, Watson, though it has been scrubbed from the ink, but I do not believe it is lost. He examined the binding and the paper's watermark. And the missing key, the one supposedly kept in this very room, was once used to access more than the vault. It opened a hidden drawer within this desk, a drawer now empty. The shadows cast by the lantern flickered against the walls. Holmes stood motionless for some time, as though conversing with the silence itself. There is something here, he said at last, something that binds this house to a sin buried far deeper than any vault could contain. And with that, the fire crackled, the wind howled against the pane, and I knew our journey into the past had only just begun. The days that followed were a study in unease. An unspoken tension hung over Farington House, like the mist that clung to its gables. Holmes, more reticent than usual, passed from room to room in silent scrutiny, his gaze lingering upon hinges, locks, and the minute inconsistencies in domestic order which so often betrayed deeper disturbances. It was during one such moment, as we stood beneath the long hall near the east stair, that Mr. Holloway appeared from a side corridor, his gait uneven as ever, but his tone sharp and direct. "If I may, Mr. Holmes," he said, "I feel bound to speak plainly. Miss Eliza has been seen wandering the corridors at night, once near the west wing where the vault lies. I cannot say what business she might have there, but it is not the first time." Holmes inclined his head, though his expression betrayed no reaction. "And who, precisely, has observed this?" "I myself, sir." "Have you spoken to her regarding it?" "No, sir. I thought it prudent to bring the matter to your attention." Holmes offered no reply, merely giving a quiet hum of acknowledgement before turning and continuing down the passage. Later that afternoon, in the garden, we found Eliza beneath the leafless arbour, her gaze lost in the distance. Holmes, with his usual directness, conveyed Holloway's accusation. She turned to us, eyes alight with restrained indignation. "If he suspects me, then let him say so openly," she said. Yes, I have walked the halls at night. This house stifles in daylight, and I find no peace indoors. But I have no key to that vault. And if something foul has stirred beneath this roof, I would wager that Mr. Holloway knows more than he will admit. Holmes, as ever, did not take sides. Have you reason to distrust him? My father trusts him implicitly, but there are things he has whispered to me in passing, about the vault, about the past, that suggest he knows far more than his station requires. That evening, Holmes confided in me privately. It is not the act of accusation which troubles me, Watson, but its timing. And there is something more curious still. Why has neither party denied the other's presence near the vault? I nodded slowly. You suspect a mutual concealment. I suspect, Holmes said gravely, that both may be dancing around the same fire, though for vastly different reasons. The following morning, as we took our tea in the drawing-room, Sir Reginald entered with a thin envelope in his trembling hand. This arrived with the post, he said, voice low. Holmes took the envelope and drew from it a folded slip of coarse parchment. The message was brief, but no less chilling for its economy. The vault yields its secrets at night. Blood once buried must resurface. No signature, no watermark, no postmark of use. Holmes held the note to the light, then to his nose, and finally to his magnifying lens. The same hand, he murmured. Same ink, same tremor in the final stroke. He turned to Sir Reginald. You have told no one outside this house of our presence here? No one. And this was delivered by post. Placed upon my breakfast tray. The footman did not see who brought it. Holmes said nothing for a long moment. He then handed the paper to me. Note the phrasing, Watson. Resurface. That implies not only concealment, but time. This is not a threat issued in haste, but one planned with deliberation. I examined the note again. And what blood does it speak of? Holmes's eyes narrowed. That, my dear fellow, is precisely what we are here to discover. He stepped to the hearth, stared into the flames, and added almost absently, begin watching Holloway closely. Discreetly. If I am correct, his past is more intricately tied to this house than even Sir Reginald imagines. The fire cracked softly in the grate, and somewhere in the depths of the house, a door creaked shut without cause. The vault, it seemed, was not the only chamber in Farington House from which old ghosts stirred. It was on the third day of our stay that Holmes devised a quiet division of labour. After receiving the latest anonymous missive, he requested that I shadow Holloway under the guise of assisting with his inventory duties in the estate's northern stores. Holmes, meanwhile, took it upon himself to conduct a more discreet inquiry into Eliza Farington's private quarters, with Sir Reginald's cautious blessing. I found Holloway in the stables, where he was reviewing the ledgers with a diligence that seemed neither forced nor affected. For several hours I remained at his side, listening to his measured speech and carefully observing his movements. There was nothing overtly suspicious, and yet an air of practiced moderation clung to him, a man aware he was being watched and careful to tread with even steps. At one point, he paused beside a crate of imported silks and regarded me coolly. You were a soldier once, were you not, Doctor? I nodded. Afghanistan. I thought so. There's a certain way a man carries himself when he's lived through dust and death. He said it evenly, but the words lingered as if laced with hidden barbs. Back at the house, Holmes rejoined me as the sun dipped behind the hedgerow. Well, he asked as we returned to our rooms. He's cautious, guarded. There's something beneath the surface, but he's too clever to show it. Holmes gave a tight smile. Indeed, and as for Miss Eliza, her chambers are immaculately ordered, too much so. The desk bears no dust along the drawers, though none claim to have entered it in days. And tucked beneath her writing blotter was a sheet of heavy parchment, creased and bearing the impression of writing. Did you lift it? With the aid of a soft pencil and my glass, yes. It appears to be the beginning of a manuscript. A confession? Holmes shook his head. Worse, a biography. He folded his arms. Eliza is not merely her father's keeper, she is his chronicler, and I believe she knows far more about the past than she has admitted. Later that evening, Holmes approached Miss Farington directly, his tone not accusatory, but coldly inquisitive. Miss Farington, he began, I am in possession of a few observations which suggest that you have been engaged in the writing of a biographical work, one centred upon your father's career. Her expression remained composed, though the colour rose slightly in her cheeks. I make no denial of it, Mr. Holmes, she replied. It is true. I have been compiling notes, letters, and recollections, my own and others. My father's life has touched the public and private spheres of this nation. That history, I believe, must be preserved. Holmes's voice remained steady. And was it in the spirit of historical preservation that you entered the vault? Now, she faltered. I did go down once. I know where he keeps the key, though I replaced it exactly as I found it. I thought I might find material, records, correspondence. But I swear to you, I took nothing. Holmes regarded her for a long moment before replying. There were footprints in the dust, Miss Farington, and a torn glove, and the lingering scent of a chemical compound not commonly found in such environments. Are you certain that you were alone in that chamber? I heard no one, she said, her voice lower now. But I did not linger. Something about that place. It chilled me. I felt watched. She looked away, then added, I fear my father is hiding something far darker than political scandal, and I fear Mr. Holloway knows the truth. Holmes gave no indication of surprise. We are near the heart of this, Miss Farington, but before the truth may rise, it must first be exhumed. As we took our leave, I could not help but feel that the house itself was drawing in its breath, preparing, perhaps, to confess. It was upon the fourth morning of our stay that Holmes summoned me to the library with an urgency that brooked no delay. Spread before him were several aged volumes, and the ledger we had previously examined, now accompanied by a small notebook in Holmes's own hand. Watson, he said, gesturing me closer, I have uncovered the link. He tapped the ledger entry marked with the initials EH and the location of the Surat campaign. I cross-referenced this with archived correspondence from the Colonial Office, which Sir Reginald, perhaps foolishly, keeps in his private collection. Among the dispatches is mention of an officer named Lieutenant Ezra Hodge, dishonourably discharged in 1893 under sealed circumstances. The name meant little to me until Holmes drew a line on the page between it and another. Edward Holloway. Holloway, he said, is but an assumed identity. The handwriting on the discharge forms matches the current estate manager's precisely, an elementary but often overlooked test. Holloway and Hodge are one and the same. My breath caught. Then the man who serves Sir Reginald is a disgraced soldier, one who may hold knowledge of whatever occurred during that campaign. Not only knowledge, Holmes said, but guilt. He has buried the truth for 3 decades, and now, it seems, the ground will hold it no longer. He folded the ledger and stood. There is a reckoning coming, Watson, and I fear the shadows cast by empire reach farther than even Sir Reginald dared believe. Before Holmes's revelation could be acted upon, news arrived which turned the matter from intrigue to calamity. Griggs, the faithful groundskeeper, was dead. We were summoned to the man's cottage on the edge of the estate. The body lay undisturbed in his narrow bed, the expression upon his features frozen in a rictus of fear. The attending physician had pronounced it sudden failure of the heart, but Holmes's inspection told another tale. "Look here," he said, lifting a small glass vial from beneath the floorboard. Hidden, empty, no label. He uncorked it, sniffed once, and recoiled. As I suspected, the scent is identical to the vault's residue, a rare compound derived from the Nux vomica tree, used in India for both medicinal and far more sinister purposes. It paralyzes before it kills. "Poisoned?" I asked. "Undoubtedly," Holmes replied, "and deliberately so." A search of the cottage yielded a slip of paper in Griggs's handwriting, a partial note reading, "Saw him at the vault, wasn't supposed," abruptly ending with an inky blot. "Griggs saw something," I murmured. "He saw too much," Holmes said gravely. "And now he pays the price for silence denied." The pieces were aligning at last, but what picture they formed remained for now shrouded in smoke and shadows. The hour was late, and yet Holmes was more alert than I had seen him in days. The shadows in the corners of our shared chamber grew longer as he paced with quiet intensity, fingers steepled and eyes sharp beneath their hooded lids. "It is time," he said suddenly, "to cease observing and to act." He had determined that the secrets within the vault, though formidable, were not the true goal of our adversary. There is something more sensitive than records, Watson. Something still alive and dangerous to those who have built their reputations on silence. And so it was that Holmes devised a plan to provoke the hand hidden behind the curtain. With Sir Reginald's reluctant cooperation, Holmes arranged for a false rumour to be released within the house. Eliza, at Holmes's instruction, would allow word to slip, first to the housekeeper, then to Holloway, that a certain incriminating document from the vault had been retrieved and secured within a secret drawer of the Chancellor's study. The drawer, it was said, was fitted behind the false back of a bookcase, accessible only to Holmes and now protected by a small trap. "It is not enough," Holmes explained, "to present bait. We must scent it. They must believe that the truth, for so long interred, is not only unearthed but poised to speak." "What do you hope to catch?" I asked. "A man desperate enough to risk all," he replied. "And in desperation, even the cunning leave footprints." That day, Holmes moved about the house, loudly inspecting hinges, muttering about deposited evidence, and returning with papers bundled beneath his coat. Each gesture was part of the performance, one carefully tuned to summon our quarry from the dark. By dusk, the stage had been set. Sir Reginald retired early, visibly shaken, and Eliza took to her chambers in silence. Holmes and I, meanwhile, made ready to lie in wait. "It will be tonight," Holmes said with quiet certainty. "The past cannot afford to wait any longer." It was a peculiar sensation, waiting, unmoving, in a room where every tick of the clock seemed to strike a chord of tension. Holmes and I had stationed ourselves behind the thick velvet curtains of the Chancellor's study, a room lined with shelves whose volumes stood as silent witnesses to power, policy, and the ghosts of empire. The fire had been allowed to burn low, casting long, flickering shadows across the desk. Holmes, beside me, was still as a statue, his breathing shallow, eyes fixed on the entrance. Hours passed in silence. I confess the weight of anticipation bore down upon me, and more than once I had to restrain the impulse to shift or speak. But Holmes was unyielding. his stillness absolute, his mind calculating each passing moment as a move upon the board. It was well past midnight when the door creaked open. The sound was barely audible, yet to Holmes it may as well have been a thunderclap. His eyes sparked to life, and his hand found mine in a silent command for stillness. A figure slipped into the room, tall, cloaked, and deliberate in movement. He carried no lantern, yet walked with the confidence of one familiar with the terrain. The glint of metal betrayed the presence of the antique key in his gloved hand. He moved directly to the shelf Holmes had designated as the location of the hidden drawer. Kneeling, he placed a hand against the woodwork, and at that instant Holmes moved. "Not a breath farther, Mr. Holloway." The man froze. Holmes stepped forward, revolver in hand, and I followed, ensuring the doorway was blocked. The intruder turned slowly, revealing not the face of the dutiful estate manager, but one of hardened resolve. Eyes cold, jaw clenched. "You may as well drop the pretense, Lieutenant Hodge," Holmes said. "You have walked long enough beneath another man's name." There was no denial, only silence, heavy and damning. And in that stillness, the study seemed to hold its breath. For truth, long buried, was at last preparing to speak. For a long moment, the room was silent, save the gentle ticking of the clock and the faint crackle of dying embers in the hearth. Holmes held his revolver steady, eyes fixed on the cloaked figure who now stood fully revealed in the half-light. The intruder made no immediate motion to flee or resist. Rather, he straightened slowly, as though the mask of civility had dropped from his shoulders along with the cloak he now cast aside. "I must commend you," the man said, his voice measured and emotionless. "You are as precise as your reputation suggests, Mr. Holmes." Holmes gave a curt nod. "And you are as predictable as guilt demands, Lieutenant." I watched the exchange with no small measure of tension. In the man's hand was still clutched the old brass-bitted key, gleaming now with the light of revelation. Holmes gestured toward it with the tip of his pistol. "Place it on the desk, if you please." The man complied without resistance. "You knew," Holmes continued, "that Eliza's manuscript threatened to reveal what the vault could not conceal forever. You feared it not for her sake, nor even for Sir Reginald's, but for your own." "I feared nothing," the man replied coldly. "Only the return of a past, better left buried." Holmes ignored the retort. "Your attempt to silence Griggs confirms that your fear was indeed operative. And now, having failed to recover what you sought, you came for the supposed original, cleverly planted, I might add, to destroy what little remained of your leverage. And yet here I am," he muttered, "caught like a fox in a steel trap." "Precisely." At that, Holmes signalled to me, and I retrieved the pistol from the writing desk drawer. Holmes had wisely placed a second weapon there, should our trap prove too ambitious. "You will now accompany us to Sir Reginald," Holmes said, "and account for yourself fully." The man's jaw tightened. "You've no authority to compel me." Holmes's voice was cool and final. "No, but Scotland Yard most certainly does, and they are already en route." The hours that followed were steeped in tension, though devoid of resistance. Under our watchful eye, the man, no longer Mr. Holloway, but rather Ezra Hodge, late of Her Majesty's Colonial Infantry, was led to the drawing-room where Sir Reginald, roused from his troubled sleep, awaited him in a state of visible disquiet. There, before the dying embers of the fire, Hodge confessed. It was not a tale told with remorse, nor even bitterness, but with the worn detachment of a man who had long since buried his conscience in the same soil that had swallowed his crimes. There was an operation in the north, he said. Surat, 23 dead, not all of them armed. There had been an uprising, but only a portion were combatants. Orders were unclear. We struck hard. Too hard. He glanced at Sir Reginald. He was the liaison, the diplomat who secured silence. The scandal would have ruined half the colonial command had it surfaced. Sir Reginald said nothing, only lowered his head into his trembling hands. I was discharged, Hodge continued, on the condition that I vanish. But I remained tethered to this house. He gave me refuge. I gave him secrecy. And now? Holmes asked quietly. Eliza's writings would have undone everything. She uncovered more than she realized. I had to act. You silenced Griggs. Hodge nodded once. He saw me near the vault. I did not wish to kill him, only frighten. But the poison was old, the dosage uncertain. I saw in Holmes's expression no triumph, only the weary resignation that so often followed his victories. You were not undone by Eliza, he said, nor by the vault. You were undone by your own fear, and by a truth too heavy to carry further. Hodge said nothing more, and in that room, for the first time, the air of Farington House seemed to exhale, like a darkness long held at bay finally giving way to dawn. It was in the library, with the doors closed and the weight of a house's secrets pressing in around us, that Ezra Hodge, formerly Holloway, spoke with the finality of a man who had nothing left to lose. Holmes remained poised, revolver still level in one steady hand. I took up a position between the door and the fireplace, not out of distrust for Holmes's marksmanship, but because I had seen what cornered men could do when truth forced their hand. Hodge, if I may at last dispense with the fiction of his adopted name, stood with his back to the dark oak panelling, arms loosely crossed, voice low and without ornament. You want the whole of it? He said. Then you shall have it. There was a campaign in Surat in '92. The Colonial Office denied it publicly, but it happened. I was there. We were told a local faction, rebel sympathizers, had infiltrated a trade settlement. We were ordered to strike without delay. He looked at Sir Reginald, whose pallor deepened with each word. But when we arrived, Hodge went on, we found no weapons, no resistance, only villagers, some frightened, some defiant, but unarmed. We waited for new orders. They never came, so we followed the last ones we'd received. There was a pause. We killed 23, men, women, 2 children. It was over in minutes. His voice had not trembled, but I could see the sheen of sweat on his brow and the tightness around his jaw. This was no performance. Sir Reginald, he continued, was the civil liaison. He arrived hours later. He saw what had happened, and he made it disappear. He told me what would be written, what would be buried, and what I must become to survive it. And the vault? Holmes asked. It contained the only surviving records of that day. Sir Reginald locked them away. His correspondence, my report, even an intercepted letter from a Bengali officer who refused to participate. We were both complicit, though his reward was office, and mine, exile. And when Eliza began her manuscript, I feared she would uncover enough to make the rest unravel. I knew she'd seek out the vault. I thought to reach it first. I thought... He stopped. But you were already waiting. There was a long silence. Sir Reginald, who until now had remained seated, rose slowly. He did not look at us, nor at Hodge, but instead turned to the fireplace. When he finally spoke, it was with a hollow resignation. I did what was necessary to save the Empire from embarrassment, but I never once thought it would return to me in this way. Holmes's voice was quiet. The Empire has many ghosts, Sir Reginald. You merely gave one of them a key. And so the confession ended. not with defiance, but with weariness. The silence in the room was no longer heavy. It was the hush of a reckoning finally spoken aloud. It was later that morning, as sunlight at last pierced the dense Sussex mist, that Holmes gathered the household once more within the drawing-room. The air was brittle with tension, though the danger had passed. Eliza sat close to the window, her face pale but resolved. Sir Reginald, worn to near collapse, stared into the hearth with the hollow gaze of a man who had seen the past claw its way to the surface. And I, as ever, sat beside Holmes, notebook in hand, though I knew I would never forget what followed. Holmes rose and began to speak, not as a judge, nor even as an accuser, but as a man laying out the inevitable sequence of truth. There were several anomalies from the outset, he said. The absence of forced entry into the vault, despite signs of disturbance. The dust displaced, yet not trampled. The torn glove, the strange chemical odour, all suggested not mere trespass, but deliberate tampering from one who had both access and motive. The key to the vault, we were told, was kept in Sir Reginald's study, yet it vanished without any report of intrusion, only to reappear later in the hands of a man who had served this house for years under false pretense. Mr. Holloway, Lieutenant Ezra Hodge, used that key to revisit the very secrets he once helped conceal. He turned slightly, eyes glinting. And then there was the glove. Torn silk left behind by haste. Its origin traced not to Eliza, as some would suppose, but to a military gentleman's formal wear. Holloway's wardrobe, when searched this morning, provided the matching pair. One glove missing, the other torn at the seam. A carelessness born of urgency. Eliza looked sharply at Holmes, her voice tight. But the vault? He knew about it all along. He did, Holmes replied. And he feared what was within, but he feared Eliza's manuscript even more, for in her careful gathering of her father's history, she was drawing ever closer to a truth that the vault merely confirmed. He folded his hands behind his back and paced once. The scuff marks on the stone floor, a concealed panel had been opened. Not broken, opened. Only someone who knew of its existence and possessed the original key could have managed it. And the chemical residue, a trace of a rare poison. Its scent familiar only to those who had handled it in the past. Holmes paused then and looked towards Sir Reginald. "It was not your silence alone that allowed the truth to fester, sir," he said, "but your complicity in preserving it." No reply came, only the low pop of a log in the hearth. Holmes continued. The crime was not theft, it was not blackmail, it was silence, maintained for 3 decades, and the violence done to preserve it. But the pattern, once begun, could not be broken without cost, and so it was broken. With that, he sat down, and for the first time since the case had begun, the room felt as though it could breathe. It was not enough for Holmes to draw conclusions. He sought confirmation with the same resolve he applied to every case. And so, that afternoon, we journeyed together to London, to a small chemist's shop off Limehouse, tucked between a pawnbroker's and a warehouse of exotic imports. The shopkeeper was an elderly man with a cautious eye and a distinct stoop. Holmes produced the vial we had recovered from Griggs's cottage, carefully wrapped in cloth, and placed it upon the counter. "I believe this originated here," he said, without introduction. The man examined it for no more than a few seconds before nodding slowly. Indeed it did. A tincture of Strychnos nux vomica, though very rare, comes from Calcutta, ordered only once in the last 12 months. Name? The shopkeeper retrieved a dusty ledger and traced a finger along the entries. E. Holloway, Signed for in person. Paid in full. Holmes made no sound. He simply closed the cloth around the vial again and tucked it into his coat. On the journey back to Sussex, he spoke only once. The poison matched the residue in the vault. The same chemical used to silence Griggs. Our man was thorough, but not invincible. And the motive? I asked. Holmes leaned back and closed his eyes. Conscience, Watson, or perhaps the absence of it. Hodge sought to erase the one man who had seen him near the vault, even if it meant reaching for the same tools he once wielded in Surat. And the truth. Holmes opened his eyes. The truth has a scent all its own. It lingers in the air long after men believe they have hidden it. And with that, we fell again into silence, London behind us, and judgment ahead. In the days that followed, the once formidable presence of Sir Reginald Farington diminished before our very eyes. The man who had so confidently strode through the halls of Westminster, who had steered financial policy with the unflinching hand of empire, now wandered his own estate with the bearing of one bereft of all anchor. He no longer spoke of legacy or reputation. He barely spoke at all. I visited him once in his study, where the curtains had been drawn and the fire left to dwindle into ash. He sat hunched in the chair beneath the portrait of his father, eyes vacant, a glass of untouched brandy at his elbow. "The ledger will come to light," he said softly, without turning. "The letters, the records, they will be read and dissected and judged by men who never knew the weight of consequence." I said nothing. There was little comfort to offer a man whose crimes were not of impulse, but of design. Holmes, for his part, showed neither sympathy nor cruelty. He treated Sir Reginald as he had always treated men tangled in the web of their own making, with a sort of detached inevitability. "You did not commit the massacre," Holmes had told him plainly, "but you facilitated its erasure, and now you must bear what remains." The newspapers caught wind soon enough. Though the particulars remained classified, the whispers of a buried colonial atrocity, one suppressed by a former Chancellor, spread swiftly through the corridors of Parliament. Allies distanced themselves. Journalists circled like crows. It was not prison that awaited Sir Reginald, but something perhaps worse for a man such as he: the slow erosion of legacy. He was no longer greeted in the street, no longer quoted in the press. His name became synonymous not with statesmanship, but with silence. And so, while Hodge, was remanded to the custody of the authorities, it was Sir Reginald who bore the heavier sentence, a life lived in the long, cold shadow of the truth he once buried. Miss Eliza Farington stood upon the threshold of decision with a fortitude I had not expected, but which, in retrospect, should not have surprised me. Though shaken by the revelations and the quiet collapse of her father's stature, she did not retreat from what she believed to be right. Holmes and I were present when she addressed the matter with her father directly. The exchange was not heated. Indeed, it was marked more by sorrow than confrontation. "You taught me," she said gently, "that honour lies not in public acclaim, but in private conviction, and so I will publish. I must." Sir Reginald did not protest. He only nodded once and turned away. Within a fortnight, a carefully written article appeared in the Fortnightly Review. Signed under Eliza's full name, it described the nature of the vault, the compromised correspondence, and the truth of what had transpired in the service of imperial expedients. Names were spared where necessary, but the heart of the matter, the atrocity in Surat, and the roles played by those in power, was laid bare. The response was immediate. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves. Parliamentary inquiry was whispered. The Colonial Office released a terse statement regarding historic investigations, and Eliza, for her part, became a reluctant symbol of inconvenient truth. I asked Holmes later if he approved of her actions. "She told the truth," he replied. "That is a rare thing, rarer still when it is told against one's own blood." "And do you believe she regrets it?" "She will," he said, "and then she will not. That too is the nature of truth. It punishes before it purifies." Eliza left Farington House shortly thereafter. I understand she took residence in London, where she resumed her writing in earnest. Whether her work shall ever find favour among those who value narrative over fact remains to be seen. But she, unlike the men whose secrets she exposed, had chosen to step into the light. In the final reckoning, it was not conscience that delivered Ezra Hodge to justice. It was the machinery of law, slow but inescapable. Within a week of our return to London, he was formally charged under his true name, with crimes ranging from attempted murder to obstruction of state records. Holmes's deposition, as always, was clinical and irrefutable. The evidence we had gathered, the glove, the key, the vial from Limehouse, was more than sufficient. The Colonial Office, which had once benefited from Hodge's silence, now washed its hands of him entirely. There was no defence mounted. Hodge offered no plea. In court, he remained as he had been in the study of Farington House, upright, composed, unrepentant. But justice has many forms. And though the courts would see to his punishment, it was the emergence of truth from the crypt of secrecy that served as the greater verdict. The massacre at Surat, once buried beneath decades of bureaucratic dust, was now a matter of public record. Its victims, long unnamed and unmourned in the annals of empire, had at last been acknowledged. Holmes, as ever, took no pride in the trial's outcome. "I did not bring him to justice," he said to me one morning as we read the paper. "He brought it upon himself the moment he chose to return." And I knew then that Holmes viewed the case not as triumph, but as necessity, a puzzle solved, but at a cost too great to tally. It was some days after the final proceedings that Holmes and I sat again by the fire at Baker Street. The case of the Chancellor's vault had come to a close, and yet I could not shake the heaviness it left behind. "There is something uniquely cruel," I said, "in how the past returns, not only to haunt, but to claim." Holmes glanced at me over the rim of his teacup. "Cruelty, Watson, implies intent. The past has no such motive. It returns because men bury it poorly." I considered his words. And yet, Hodge, Sir Reginald, even Eliza, they were all caught in its snare. Some bore guilt, others bore legacy. None escaped unscathed. Holmes nodded. "Which is why I've often said the truth is neither moral nor immoral. It simply is. The facts we unearthed were not noble. They were not evil. They were inevitable." I looked to the fire. "And what of justice? Was it done?" Holmes leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "A man was punished. A name was sullied. A truth was exposed. Is that justice, or merely balance restored?" I could not answer. Outside, the carriages passed in steady rhythm. The mist of London returned, as it always did, wrapping the city in its pale embrace. Holmes, after a long silence, spoke again, softly and without embellishment. "The truth, Watson, is not kind. It is not cruel. It is not honourable. It is not shameful. It is simply inevitable." And in that moment I understood. Not all mysteries end in satisfaction. Some end only in revelation, and the quiet, inescapable toll it takes upon those who dare to seek it. As we sat once more in the dim glow of the Baker Street hearth, The silence between us lingered, thick with thought. I broke it at last. You solved it brilliantly, Holmes. And yet, there is a sadness to it, isn't there? That a secret kept in the name of duty could cause such ruin. Holmes didn't respond at once. He leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the firelight, fingers pressed together in that familiar, contemplative steeple. "Secrets, Watson, are like debts," he said. "Left unpaid, they compound. Hidden long enough, they do not disappear, they fester, and in the end, they collect their due." He stood then, pacing toward the window, where the London mist rolled in like a curtain drawing closed upon the stage. In this case, the vault was never truly about what it held, but about what its silence allowed to thrive. Guilt, corruption, the belief that truth can be entombed like a corpse. But truth, my dear Watson, truth is the one ghost that always finds its way out. Now let me pose a question to you, dear reader. What do you believe was Ezra Hodge's greatest mistake? Was it returning to the scene of his past, trusting in Sir Reginald's silence, or believing that a vault could keep the truth buried forever? Share your theories in the comments below. We'd love to read what you deduce. If this tale stirred your love for classic mysteries and the brilliant mind of Sherlock Holmes, consider subscribing for more cases from the foggy streets of Victorian London. And if you know someone who enjoys a good mystery, do them the honor of sharing this story with them. After all, some secrets are meant to be uncovered together. Until next time, keep your eyes open, your mind sharp, and remember, the game is always afoot.